What's up, everybody? For the first time in recorded history, it is an OU Insider Live sans Brandon Drumm, who is taking a very well-deserved few days off. The man grinds as hard as anyone, as most of you that are regulars well know, and certainly those of you that are VIPs over on OUinsider.com. You guys are well aware that Brandon puts in as much work as anybody on the OU beat. So he is away with the wife for a little while. I am Parker Thune. I am holding down the fort alongside the newest member of the OU Insider team, Jesse Crittenden. Jesse, first off, man, I feel like most people have gotten to interact with you a little bit over on the VIP board at OU Insider, and obviously those who subscribe to this channel have seen your face on the Quick Slants series. But if you could just give everybody an introduction to you for those that haven't met you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I mentioned this before, so I apologize ahead of time. But it's really the last few weeks really have been great. I can't be more appreciative to Parker, to you and Brandon and all the OU Insider team for having me along, and the VIP members, everybody that's read me and commented and everything. I was already on the OU beat at the Norman Transcript for the last couple of years before I had this gig. And I can tell you in pretty much every way, this is just a better gig with working alongside great people, doing things I want to do, and interacting with you guys. I really couldn't be more appreciative and more thankful. So I'm feeling a little pressure tonight to be replacing Brandon, but I can't say I'm going to do as good of a job, but I'm going to do my best.
Well, as those of you watching, and especially those of you that watch every Wednesday know, we try to make this show highly interactive. We've got about an hour with those of you that subscribe and that watch this show live. So whatever questions you have, whatever topics you want us to hit, drop your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat. We will get to as many as we can. Tonight, Wednesday nights, those are about you guys, getting you guys the opportunity to have your questions answered by the experts, or those of us that masquerade as experts. However, whatever your opinion of the OU Insider crew is. But awesome to have Jesse along for the very first time here. Awesome to see so many of our regulars in the chat already. Ronnie Crimson blowing it up, as always. Topher reminds us to shout out Ricardo LeBlanc. So we'll just kick things off with a shout out. What's up, Ricardo? Great to have you watching as always. And Jesse, I think the natural place to start is spring football. And obviously, Brandon and I dish on this every single week on this series. Always plenty of new thoughts, new facts to go off, new opinions formed week after week as we see this team more and more. But in the 3 weeks of spring practice that have been, and in the 4 sessions that we've gotten the chance to watch as members of the media outside the Switzer Center, outside Owen Field, on the practice fields for the Sooners, is there anything in particular that has stood out to you as far as overarching takeaways and opinions?
Yeah, I think the main thing, honestly, is just the amount of guys who are making plays and making an impact. I think that's the thing. Obviously, as early as you want, you can try to pencil in a depth chart, or you can try to figure out how young guys are going to fit in, how returning guys are going to fit in, how transfer guys are going to fit in. But I think the thing that we're finding out here, and especially given within the context of the 6-7 finish to last year's football season, I think you're seeing a lot of guys making plays, and I think the coaching staff has kind of approached this as you can't take anything for granted. Now, obviously, there's things that we can infer, whether that's the quarterback position or the running back position, but you really can't take anything. You can't assume anything. And I think the main thing is the amount of young guys that are stepping up, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, whether that's young returning guys or incoming freshmen. So I think in some ways, obviously, it'd be great if you had all returning starters and they were all amazing last year and you could bring them all in. But I think there's an excitement to the potential and the amount of guys who are vying for playing time, because I think once we get to, week 1, the guys who are going to be out on the field, it's going to be clear that they earned it. And to quite honest with you, I expect a few young guys to get some playing time pretty early. I really do.
By the way, obviously, so many of you are already chiming in the chat with your questions and opinions. By all means, continue doing so. However, the poll tonight in the super chat, we need y'all to vote. Beard Jesse or clean shaven Jesse? Cast your vote in the chat. Mongo just dropped in a $20 super chat, says, missed you guys last week. Shout out to Ricardo LeBlanc. There we go. We get 2 shout outs to Ricardo LeBlanc within the first 5 minutes on air. So Ricardo, you were a valued member of the squad. Thank you for watching as always. Now, a couple of observations from the super chat. Folks curious about the kicker and punter battles as the Sooners look to replace Michael Turk. They also got to replace long snapper Casey Kelleher. So really, Zach Schmidt, the incumbent kicker, the only one of the 3 specialists that are going to be returning to this program. So Schmidt, the leader in the clubhouse, to be your kicker. He'll be challenged by Reddy Mustafa-Raj, the junior college transfer from NEO, as well as by redshirt freshman Gavin Marshall. Your long snapper of the future is Ben Anderson. He redshirted last year as a true freshman behind Casey Kelleher. He will inherit the duty this season. And then punter will be an interesting battle between Josh Plaster, the Arizona State transfer who's already been in the program for 2 seasons, and newcomer Luke Elzinga, a 2-time All-MAC selection at Central Michigan. So kind of unclear who your starting punter is right now, but Schmidt, naturally the odds-on favorite to be your starting kicker, and Ben Anderson, the odds-on favorite to be your starting long snapper. Now, we had somebody mention it earlier in the chat, Jesse, but Damon Harmon is a guy in the back end of this secondary for Oklahoma that has played some safety. He's played some nickel back in the day. He was a cornerback in high school, a guy with a lot of versatility, but just not hearing a whole lot on him throughout the spring. And that's somewhat natural when you've got guys like Josiah Wagner and Peyton Bowen commanding the headlines. But when you look at this secondary as a whole, Woody Washington coming back, Billy Bowman coming back, Key Lawrence coming back, you add Reggie Pearson, you add Kendall Dolby. Obviously, you bring in Peyton Bowen. Who are some of the guys? And I think Harmon is somebody that certainly fits into that category in the secondary. But across this defense, who do you think are some of the players that maybe aren't getting talked about enough that you can see playing substantial snaps in the fall?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think that's the thing, especially, we talked about it that, especially when you zoom in on the secondary, that there's so much going on. There's so much you can't really say for sure. So I think it's natural that there's going to be times where there's going to be guys that just aren't mentioned, particularly if they're not new or, if they've been in the program but haven't seen the field a lot. So I think Damon Harmon fits into that category. I think the thing for me is, I think you can look at the secondary, but I think to me, look at the defensive line. I think there really hasn't been a ton of talk. I mean, Todd Bates mentioned a couple of guys like Grayson Holton and Kelvin Gilliam, guys who have been in the program, but I don't think that obviously hasn't been the focus for the most part, right? I think Rondo Bothroyd has gotten a lot of focus. I think PJ Adebawore has gotten a lot of focus. I think there's a lot of people who expect, Isaiah Coe to make a big impact in the interior defensive line, or maybe it's Jordan Kelly. But I really do think that's a battle there with a lot of different guys, whether that's Jacob Lacey as a transfer or someone like Kelvin Gilliam or someone like Grayson Holton who could make an impact. I also think Marcus Stripling is a guy that hasn't gotten a lot of there's not a lot of people talking about him, even within, the media availabilities. His name hasn't come up a lot. He's a guy that's been around the program. So, I think there's a lot of guys that can fit in that category, but I think when you particularly look at the defensive line, I think there's a lot of guys there that haven't maybe gotten their due.
Yeah, it almost feels like this is round 3 of the now or never year for Marcus Stripling. He's a guy that had so much promise early in his career. You recall that COVID shortened season back in 2020. He didn't see the field a whole lot because of the presence of Nick Bonito and the emergence of Isaiah Thomas. But when he did see the field, he was making plays. And he was one of those guys that I think everybody figured his snap count would continue to climb as guys progressed through the program, moved on to the NFL, graduated. And it's been quite the opposite. His snap count has steadily declined, and he's yielded snaps to R. Mason Thomas as a true freshman last year, to Ethan Downs as a true freshman in 2021, to Grayson Holton even, who played quite a bit as a true freshman last season. So Stripling, definitely one of those guys. And I think there are several of them, especially on the defensive side of the ball on this football team, that are really facing a make or break year here in 2023. And this is Stripling's last year. So not only is it make or break for him, but it truly is, by definition, now or never. Now, on to your recruiting questions for just a second. Obviously, everybody is curious about the Peyton Pierce recruitment, the 4-star linebacker out of Lovejoy, Texas, committed to Ohio State last night in what was a relatively out of nowhere decision. He announced that it was coming just a few hours before he dropped the commitment announcement. And needless to say, folks in the OU circle were surprised. OU fans in general were quite surprised because Peyton Pierce comes from a very pro-Sooner family, has a lot of Oklahoma ties. Brother went to OU. Mom went to OU. Grandparents live in Norman. His great-grandfather was kind of the original Sooner of the family. Dad played cornerback in Tulsa back in the day, and he had been to Oklahoma a lot since he had picked up that offer last April, if I'm not mistaken. And next to Eli Bowen, Pierce was a guy that appeared to be a stone-cold lock for Oklahoma in the class of 2024, just because there was so much binding him to Norman. He grew up a Sooner fan, grew up on the south end of the Cotton Bowl wearing crimson and cream. It all made a ton of sense. And then, boom, here comes James Laurinaitis, built a strong relationship with Peyton Pierce while he was an assistant at Notre Dame. And then when Laurinaitis moved back to his alma mater this past January to take a job as assistant linebackers coach, Ohio State immediately started pursuing Pierce, and Laurinaitis was kind of the lead dog in their pursuit of him. He only got on campus with Ohio State once prior to this commitment. So I think to a certain extent, you simply have to tip your cap to the Buckeyes here. And I've been asked a lot over the last 24, 36 hours about this recruitment and about why and how Ohio State was able to slam the door so quickly. And you heard Peyton talk about it in the commitment interviews that he did. He just, from the time he went up to Ohio State, he just knew that's where he wanted to go, and he didn't feel the need to drag it out any longer than necessary, which makes sense. If I'm not mistaken, he had north of 40 offers. He was fielding calls and texts left and right. That's an awesome kid, by the way, a kid that always made time to talk face-to-face with whoever wanted to talk face-to-face, and it was very much an open-door policy at Lovejoy. One of my favorite kids I've ever covered, but he's going to be an Ohio State Buckeye. And James Laurinaitis, in the year of our Lord 2023, wins a recruiting battle over Brent Venables. And really, the vast majority of the Sooner staff, they were going after Pierce hard. James Skalski was heavily involved. Ted Roof, naturally, was heavily involved. So no real way to sugarcoat it. No two ways about it. This is one that stings for Oklahoma, and it comes on the heels of Aaron Flowers' commitment to Oregon. And it seemed for a while like Oklahoma was the leader in the pack for Flowers' pledge as well. So 2 shots to the chin in the span of less than a week for Oklahoma. But this is the nature of recruiting. Targets come and go. I don't think the Sooner staff will 100% shut the door or sever those lines of communication with either Pierce or Flowers, but definitely 2 guys that nobody should count on them being a part of Oklahoma's class going forward naturally, if not solely because of their commitments, also because of the fact that there were very legitimate reasons both of those 2 committed to each of the schools to which they pledged. So going to be tough for Oklahoma to sway either of those. Now, we go back to the chat here. Any concern for Nigel Smith now that Peyton Pierce is a Buckeye? No, not a ton of concern right now. He is going to take an official visit to Ohio State. So this is potentially something to watch down the road when OV season does roll around. But as of right now, I still regard OU as the leader in the clubhouse for 4-star defensive lineman Nigel Smith out of Melissa, Texas. Ronnie Crimson is going Jordan Lockhart and Kamori House stock up. And those are certainly the 2 that I would begin to watch closely. Those 2 and Braden Platt are the names to get to know at the linebacker position right now for Oklahoma as they move on from Peyton Pierce, who, like I said, was a guy that was the odds seemed very high that he was going to end up in Oklahoma's class, but he's a Buckeye. The Sooners are still pursuing Sammy Brown, Lockhart, Kamori House, Braden Platt, the names to know there as well. Now, I want to talk about an interesting situation that has arisen over the last, 10 to 12 hours And that would be the pending portal entry of freshman Texas Longhorns wide receiver Brennan Thompson. Now, Brennan Thompson was one of the fastest prospects in America in the 2022 class. You can make the argument he was the fastest out of Spearman, Texas, tiny little town that's actually geographically further north than Norman is. So out there in the Texas Panhandle, he was pursued heavily from the time he was a sophomore by the likes of not only Oklahoma, but Clemson, Texas A&M, Oklahoma State, Texas, where he ended up committing, obviously, and scores of others. Now, if you rewind to when he received the Oklahoma offer, it was during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And quite immediately, Oklahoma emerged as kind of the front runner to land his commitment. And I remember doing a story on him at the time. I was still working over at Sports Illustrated. Brennan Thompson, he was one of the very first recruit profiles I ever did as a full-time journalist when I was over at Sports Illustrated. And incredibly humble, good-natured kid. And you turn on the tape, you can see it. You watch the videos of his track runs that he's posted on social media. His speed is truly elite. He is a two-sport athlete down there at Texas right now, plays football and runs track. But rewind to his recruitment. End of his sophomore year, beginning of his junior year, OU was very well positioned for Brennan Thompson. Then, end of his junior year, beginning of his senior year, that rolls around, and Oklahoma has already filled up at wide receiver in the 2022 class. They've got Luther Burden. They've got Talon Shetron. They've got Jordan Hudson. None of those three ended up signing with the University of Oklahoma. So obviously that did not transpire the way that Lincoln Riley and his staff imagined. But what also happened was Riley and his staff left for USC, or the majority of his staff left for USC in November of 2021. Amidst it all, Thompson's recruitment began to narrow itself down to the point where he was really only considering Oklahoma State, Texas, Texas A&M, and Clemson. Clemson was the favorite for a little while. Then Texas emerged. He ended up committing to Texas, enrolled there, played in several games as a true freshman, only caught one pass for 32 yards. But per a report from Nick Harris of Rivals earlier today, he is planning on entering the portal when it reopens, I believe on the 15th, if I'm not mistaken. April 15th is when the transfer portal window opens. Now, there is some immediate belief here that Oklahoma is going to be involved and may actually be the favorite for Brennan Thompson when he officially hits the portal and things are open for business. But as I mentioned, Thompson, a kid that's one of the fastest in the country at any level, 10.2 in the 100-meter dash. I believe he's gone sub 10.2 a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken. So we're talking about truly elite speed here. I remember somebody in the business who's a lot more accomplished to this point than I am told me back in the day when he was still playing out there at Spearman, this is a guy that is a small school Tyreek Hill. That's what he is. That's what he's going to be at the collegiate level. Now, didn't get much of a chance to flash his talents at the University of Texas as a true freshman. But Jesse, let me ask you, in a world in which Brennan Thompson is a Sooner, let's just say he hits the portal here in a few days, Oklahoma immediately reaches out, they prioritize him, they bring him home, he crosses the Red River, and he's wearing the crimson and cream. In that world, in that realm, he does not have a ton of size. He's generously 5'10". He's not terribly big in terms of overall bulk. So there's still some physical development that needs to happen. But how much fun do you think Jeff Lebby could have with a weapon in his offense that's got 10.2 100-meter dash speed, Olympic type speed?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty easy to, I mean, if all of that were to happen, I think it'd be pretty easy to say he would be the fastest guy on the OU wide receiver corps. And that's the thing. I think, despite the departures of Marvin Mims, Theo Weiss, and I include Braden Willis, who I know was a tight end but caught a lot of passes. I think the wide receiver corps has been something to be excited about. I think there's depth there. I think there's talent there. However, if you were to look at any area in that receiver core that they maybe don't have a ton of. It's just straight up speed. It's just quickness and speed. And I think, I think he's a guy that would come in and, I think he would find a role in the offense right away, not only because of his speed and how much he would boost the receiving core that OU already has because of his speed, but also because of the speed of Jeff Levy's offense. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say, you could speculate on how big his role would be, but I think at the very least, his speed and the speed of Jeff Levy's offense, he could find, I'm sure there'd be more than one utilization for him in the offense.
Well, and I think versatility too, regardless of what side of the ball it's on. Versatility is a quality you like to have across your roster, and that's what Thompson brings to the table. And I think that type of weaponry already exists in Oklahoma's offense, and I look most specifically at a guy like Gavin Freeman, who was used both as a runner and a receiver last year in his first season as an Oklahoma Sooner. But I posted this on the OU Insider VIP board a bit earlier. Gavin Freeman is 10.6 fast, which is plenty fast. Brennan Thompson is 10.2 fast, which is absurdly fast. So I don't think it is outlandish to figure that that's a guy that could have an immediate impact when he gets to Oklahoma, not just as a kick returner, but as a gadget player and as somebody that you can move around. Now, I know it's high praise and I know it's a lofty comparison to make, but down the line, you could foresee Thompson being a poor man's Tavon Austin, that type of player. Now, obviously, Tavon Austin's kind of a one-of-a-kind player in the landscape of college football over the last quarter century or so. There are very few guys that brought what he brought to the table. But Thompson's a dude with that type of speed, elusiveness, agility, open field ability. So we will keep close tabs on that situation, and there's already a lot more posted on the Thompson situation at ouinsider.com. So if you are not a VIP, I would recommend you head over there, sign up right now for just a few bucks a month. You can also get a trial period, 30 days for just $1. If you don't like it, you don't have to make a commitment beyond that, but with the amount of information and the quality of information that I'm feeding you, that Jesse's feeding you, that Brandon's feeding you on a daily basis, we tend to think you'll want to stick around. But with that, we go back to the chat, Jesse, and a very good question earlier on that I want to revisit, and I want to give credit to whoever it was that actually asked this question. But here it is from Jackson. Is there an OU summer enrollee from the 2023 class that you think could make an impact this upcoming season? So you look at the guys that haven't yet gotten to campus, but that will in the month of June. Is there one that you can identify as somebody that could have an immediate role?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something that I've thought about a lot, just because I think obviously once you get to spring practices and a lot of the classes already on campus, I think it's easy to get caught up kind of in the guys that are already on campus and kind of forget, that there's more reinforcements coming in the summer. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of different options here on the offensive side of the ball. I think someone like Jaquise Petaway is a guy that could really make an impact on a receiver core right away. I think Lewis Carter at linebacker is a guy just with his size, with his speed, obviously a 4-star guy. And obviously the linebacker position is something that Brent Venables has talked about a lot as an area. I think it's even with, the departures of Deshaun White and David Agwebu, I think the position is a little bit more, there's a little bit more better depth there this year, but still that's a position that Brent Venables is focused on a lot. That's a position group that he's really trying to develop. I think Lewis Carter can come in and make his presence felt right away. And then someone like Jacoby Johnson at defensive back, not only just the size, the speed, not only just that he's a 4-star prospect, but just him being an Oklahoma kid. I think there's a kind of a special connection there. And so I think, I got to watch Jacoby Johnson even when I was at the transcript covering Norman high school sports. I got to see Jacoby Johnson, and that dude, every time he's on the field, regardless offensive or defensive, he was the best athlete on the field. His jumping skill, his jumping ability, his athleticism leaped off the page. And so, I think it's hard. It's always hard to single out too many guys, or it's hard to single out guys because I think there's a lot of guys that can make an impact. But I think those three guys in particular are guys I'm looking at too. By fall camp, I think you'll see the coaches. I think you'll see some players talking about those three guys. Who do you think?
I agree 100% with you on Lewis Carter as well as Samuel Masigo. I think those are two guys, the linebacker position, where they're rare athletes at that position. And OU has had some good backers over the years. I don't know if they've had many that come in as college ready as those two. And you see it in the way they play the game. It's so funny with Samuel Masigo too, because he's one of the absolute nicest, most docile people you will ever meet off the football field. But those pads come on, that helmet goes on, he is an absolute menace. And Lewis Carter's just a different breed of cat, man. So I'm very, very excited about those two. And maybe their time doesn't come at Oklahoma until 2024 when you're playing in the SEC, but those are certainly two guys that I can see playing early snaps as true freshmen. And I think they'll push to do so just because they're also both very fast. And that is one thing that Oklahoma has lacked in the linebacker core in recent years. They have lacked speed. Omasigo and Carter, in addition to Jaren Kanak, in those three guys, you got three dudes that can all cover the entire field with ease. And so I know Danny Stutzman is kind of the calling card for this linebacker unit right now, and Deshaun McCall is a very valuable addition as well. But I'm really eager to see what the linebacker room looks like circa 2024, 25, when you have Omasigo and Carter as full-time starters in the mix. Back to the chat here. And by the way, what I want to add on Jacoby Johnson, I still maintain that guy ends up playing wide receiver by the time he's done at the University of Oklahoma. I'm just not convinced that right now with the depth Oklahoma has at cornerback and what a special talent Jacoby is on the offensive side of the ball, I think he ends up making that position change. I think he plays offense. I think he lines up at receiver when it's all said and done. From Josh in the chat, can you tell me why DeMarco Murray is not going after Jarrett Gibson? He's the number one running back in the country and sounds like he wants to come to OU really bad, but has no offer. Well, here's what I can say about that situation. And yes, I can tell you that Jarrett Gibson did really want an offer from Oklahoma. And had he gotten an offer, OU would have been a very serious consideration. Two things, though. A, DeMarco Murray does not care about recruiting rankings. He's got his own rankings. He's got his own board. He's got his own hierarchy and pecking order when it comes to running backs in the 2024 class. And so in general, I would say it is wise to trust DeMarco Murray in that regard because he is a lot more credible when it comes to evaluating and developing running backs than literally any of us. So that is an area in which I'm willing to extend DeMarco Murray the benefit of the doubt. Also, here's what I know about the Jarrett Gibson recruitment. It would likely have been an arduous one, if you catch my drift. And there would have been a lot of red tape and a lot of drama that would have come along with it if Oklahoma had decided to pursue Jarrett Gibson. So the Sooners instead turned to a couple of guys in Caden Durham and Tavani Mizell and Xavier Robinson. You look at the board beyond that, James Peoples, another great example. Guys that, well, how do I put this? Their recruitments were going to be a lot more straightforward, and there wasn't going to be any BS that you had to sift through. That's more DeMarco Murray's speed, and so that's why he's targeted the guys that he has targeted. Somebody said, finally, after asking 30 times, thanks, Parker. Well, you know what? This is the nature of the beast here on these Wednesday night, folks. We get to as many questions as we can, but I can promise you that we are not going to get to them all. Let's go back to the chat here. Lewis Carter is a missile, says Sean B. Yes. Kim Hurst asked Parker, how is LeBlanc doing? What have your impressions been of Derek LeBlanc, Jesse? Because obviously, he was a top 100 prospect for much of the 2023 recruiting cycle. Didn't show up to the All-American Bowl or the All-American game, because he actually elected to practice with Oklahoma for the bowl period leading up to the Cheetah Bowl against Florida State. So that kind of assisted in tanking his recruiting ranking. A lot of people looked at that and red flags, alarms kind of went off about Derek LeBlanc, but make no mistake, he's a very talented football player, very sizable, very athletic, very versatile. And I know that folks within the Switzer Center are very, very excited about his potential in the long term. But from what you've seen of Derek LeBlanc on the practice field, Jesse, what stands out?
Yeah, but you mentioned the word sizable. I think that's the thing that stood out to me, right? From the first few open practices that we've gotten to go to, I think it's his size, particularly his length and his height. I think that's the thing. I think he's a guy that it's I think it's sometimes it's tough to stand out whether you're on the offensive line or defensive line, because all of those guys are really big and kind of unique. But I think Derek LeBlanc is a guy that you see him right away. He's just a guy that I think is it provides a length and a height that the defensive line otherwise doesn't really have outside of him. So yeah, I mean, I think and Todd Bates talked about him a little bit on Monday. I think they're very excited about him. Again, I think it sometimes can be hard in spring practices to get around to everybody and to talk about literally everybody that's coming in. But I think Derek LeBlanc is somebody, I mean, you talk to people around the program, you get to watch him in open practices. He's a guy that they're excited about because I honestly think he's unique and stands out among the rest of that defensive line group. So again, there is more depth on the defensive line this year than compared to last year. So, and we've seen from this coaching staff, they really value experience. They really value veterans or guys who have seen the field. So, it can be tough for young freshmen, but none of that should take away from the fact that Derek LeBlanc is somebody that the program is really, really excited about.
Somebody in the chat, well, we'll get to this in just a minute, but let's hit a couple more quick ones here. Topher B asks, when is Parker putting in a crystal ball for Bennett Warren to OU? Not terribly confident in that situation yet as it pertains to OU's pursuit of Bennett Warren. That said, I will say I am pretty close to entering crystal balls for a couple offensive line targets. And that's all I will say for the moment. If you're a VIP on OUinsider.com, you might have a decent idea of who I'm referring to, but there are a couple more offensive linemen on the board for Bill Bedenbaugh right now that I'm getting close to crystal ball territory with. Trap House Boomin asked, Devon Mitchell got to be the next verbal, right? Fingers crossed. No, I don't think so. I think it'll be after he takes official visits. And look, OU is the heavy favorite there right now. And Michael Hawkins' commitment, and it was imminent. Everybody kind of realized that, but getting Michael Hawkins on board and also getting Devon's father, Marco, up for a practice last week, that has really started to speed things along. Again, there is more posted on the OU Insider VIP board, but suffice it to say, things are trending very, very nicely right now between OU and Devon Mitchell. The question I wanted to get to, where is it here? Yes, from Evan. Can we talk about that Desan hit? And for those that didn't see it, and I don't know how you wouldn't have, because it made the rounds on social media immediately when the media was in attendance at practice on Monday. But Desan McCullough, they're working goal line situations, full speed, full pads, and he flies into the backfield and buries Caleb Hicks. And I think that was a moment, Jesse, where Sooner fans collectively kind of, I think of the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing meme, where he's just like, yep, that's the guy we were counting on when we found out he was transferring from Indiana to Oklahoma. That right there, that's the guy that we were sold on being the Cheetah of the future and a potential All-American at the University of Oklahoma. So overall, we've heard Desan McCullough talk about the fact that it's a work in progress for him. He's learning the defense. He's learning the scheme. He's getting up to speed, getting comfortable in Brent Venables' defense. But it certainly seems that early returns on him have been pretty positive.
You asked the question earlier, who are some guys that we don't talk about enough? I think the flip side of that question is, who are guys you can't talk enough about? And I think that's Desan McCullough. I really think he's the guy that, among all of the freshmen, all of the transfers on the defensive side of the ball, I think Desan McCullough honestly has made I guess let me back up. I should say arguably has made the biggest impact early. There's some candidates for that, but I think it's Deshaun McCullough. I think he is a really good fit in Brent Venables' scheme. And yeah, he's talked about it's a work in progress. There's things he still has to understand. It's the spring. There's still several months before we get to football season. But I think Deshaun McCullough being the starting Cheetah for next year's defense is about as much of a lock as you can get. And to hear other teammates when we talk to other guys on the team bring him up, not only what they say but what they say about him unprompted. I think Deshaun McCullough, it's clear he's coming right away with a really good mindset, and obviously his measurables, his size, his speed. I honestly think he's an ideal fit for the Cheetah position. I think when Brent Venables has a Cheetah in his system, Deshaun McCullough is almost the exact prototype for a guy he would want to fill that position. So again, it's early. There's a lot of time that could go on. There's a lot of things that could change. But I think Deshaun McCullough, as far as who are the guys that have made the biggest impact either, early on, not just new guys, but just anybody, is Deshaun McCullough.
The chat's got jokes. Mr. D says, got here late. Start over, please. Well, the good news is you'll be able to watch the full replay on the channel as soon as we finish up here. Will says, all my stock is in Gavin Sawchuk. And that's a guy, Jesse, that it's an unfortunate situation with Javonte Barnes needing to sit out the rest of spring ball. But it seems that two guys that have really not only benefited from that situation, but seized the bull by the horns in Barnes' absence are Caleb Hicks, and we talked about earlier in the show. And that kid's been good this spring. Really good, but also Gavin Sawchuk, who in the absence of Barnes becomes the clear lead dog in this backfield. And obviously I think the expectation is that those two are going to split carries come the fall, but Sawchuk certainly a guy that can continue to earn brownie points with the staff with the additional practice field snaps that come in the absence of Javonte Barnes.
Yeah, no, and we talked about him in a quick slants video recently about some of the injuries that have piled up. We talked about Javonte Barnes. We talked about, but among all the injuries, who are maybe some of the biggest benefactors? And I think Gavin Sawchuk's name came up, and I think for good reason. It's kind of an interesting situation because Gavin Sawchuk, obviously a guy that didn't see the field much last season, but it's not every freshman that can come in a bowl game against a really good defense and have 100 rushing yards in a game right away. There's just not very many guys that can really do that. I think he's a guy that the team has been really excited about. And I think again, it's pretty unique to have two young guys that you can project to be the head of the backfield going in to the fall. But with Javonte Barnes' injury, I think we've seen a Gavin Sawchuk that has really who has taken control of that room. You mentioned Caleb Hicks, Dalen Smothers. I think Gavin Sawchuk kind of sees it as I think Gavin Sawchuk sees the room, sees Javonte Barnes' absence as an opportunity for him to kind of step up and really take a hold of that room. So again, despite Javonte Barnes' injury, I think we can expect him obviously to be heavily in the mix. But I think Gavin Sawchuk is using this opportunity to really push his own name out just a little bit more.
Well, Mr. D, don't pull your fingernails out. I fixed the plaques. There you go. Thanks to Ryan for pointing that out earlier in the chat. I want to get back to the wide receiver room because several folks have been talking about that in the chat as well, Jesse. And it does appear that the one guy, and maybe this was unexpected, maybe not as much so, but it kind of depends on what your opinion was of him heading into spring ball when he got to campus at the University of Oklahoma. And for those that watched some of his tape at Michigan, some of the plays that he made there, perhaps it's not that surprising, but Andrell Anthony has really opened some eyes throughout spring ball to this point. And Jalil Farouk and Drake Stoops, Jesse, those are the only two guys returning to this Oklahoma roster that caught more than 3 passes in a Sooner uniform last year. So there was going to be somebody that emerged. There was always going to be somebody that kind of burst onto the scene for the first time this fall. And obviously it's way too soon to call the race or make any sweeping declarations, but seems like the guy that has been the most impressive in that regard amongst that group of newcomers / risers has been Andrell Anthony.
Yeah, I knew pretty soon as you started talking, I knew you were going to say it's Andrell Anthony. And yeah, again, this is the spring. A lot of people get talked up. things like that. But yeah, Angelo Anthony, you see him in practice. I think the main thing about his impact is not only that obviously he had some spurts, at Michigan, but I think the thing is he provides something for OU, not only that they don't really have much in the rest of the room, but also when you think of Marvin Mims and his impact last year, particularly as a deep play guy, and then his departure from the room, there is a void as far as a guy that can straight up run down the field and make plays, beat defensive backs with his athleticism. Angelo Anthony, again, I think we both see the wide receiver room as having a lot of depth and some young guys in particular that can make an impact. But Angelo Anthony, I think he has seen the field and he has a very specific skill set that I think is beneficial, not only because OU doesn't have the OU doesn't have what he provides much outside of him, but I think in Jeff Levy's offense, it's clear the deep ball is a thing they really want to utilize. He can fill that role right away. And yeah, talk to any wide receiver, talk to any offensive player, talk to any defensive back through spring practices. Angelo Anthony's name almost always comes up.
Yeah. Well, and we talked to Gavin Freeman at media availabilities on Monday, and he said of Angelo Anthony, that guy's just a straight burner. And so that's coming from Gavin Freeman, who is plenty fast in his own right. So when you hear it coming from somebody who is that fast himself, you tend to believe that the hype is legit for Angelo Anthony. So I think that's a guy that maybe you get a little bit more out of him in the fall than many anticipated you would when he announced that he was transferring from Michigan. Back to the chat here. Jimmy Satterfield asks, how is Stogg looking? Austin Stogner has been really impressive thus far. His leadership is one thing that, in talking to sources around the Switzer Center, has really stood out. And it seems that year away at South Carolina and the knowledge that this season is going to be his last at the University of Oklahoma, his last year of college football, that's really helped him grow up, really helped him mature, and help him step into a leadership role as one of the elder statesmen on the entire team, not just in the tight end room, not just on the offense, but on the entire team. Jacob Ogle dropped $5 in the super chat. Appreciate you, Jacob. Wants to know, are there any updates on Sammy Brown and Williams Nwaneri? Now, on Sammy Brown, look, that's one where we're not going to have a clear sense of the movement therein until official visits, because as of right now, Clemson is the school that has positioned itself best for Brown. He just visited Tennessee. He obviously just visited Oklahoma last week. He's been to Georgia several times. It doesn't sound like Georgia's going to be the spot. And I know there's conflicting intel on that, as there is with generally pretty much every single 5-star, but Clemson appears to be where the safe money is right now. OU gained some momentum hosting Brown on that visit last week, but if OU makes a surge, a real surge here, it's probably not going to be until official visits happen for Sammy Brown in June. So I would say not necessarily curb your enthusiasm, but table your enthusiasm for a couple months here until he gets the opportunity to take an OV to Oklahoma. On Williams Nwaneri, yeah, he's visiting everywhere this spring. And, when I initially put the crystal ball in at the beginning of March, that was one thing that I mentioned was, look, he's going to take so many visits in the spring, and there are so many schools that are going to have the chance to make an impression on him that you're just going to kind of have to ride it out and trust that the Oklahoma staff is going to be able to maintain the momentum that they were able to accrue at the beginning of March when they hosted Will Nwaneri. And they have. And my read on it, especially as somebody that's up in Kansas City a lot. Whoa, I went dark mode there. I'll fix that in a second. But as somebody that spends a lot of time up in Kansas City, what I can say for certain is that if this thing starts to trend in another direction, I'll know and I'll be able to have a pretty early read on that. But as of right now, Oklahoma is still right there at the top for Will Nwaneri. I will be up in Kansas City again this weekend, and I'm going to check in with him in person. So we'll see if anything has changed amongst the visits that he has taken. But right now, I do still think Oklahoma is the school that's in the best shape. Will Banks Auto Sales wants to know how DJ Graham is looking at wide receiver. Jesse, why don't you talk about DJ Graham? Give me a little filibuster so I can go fix my camera, my perpetually problematic camera.
Yeah, no, I think the thing with DJ Graham, and we've seen it. I mean, I think there was some questions about how quickly is he going to be able to fit in, and what exactly does his role look like in the OU offense. But literally, I think every wide receiver that you talk to, the one thing they point out, it's not even necessarily his athleticism or his speed or his past history as a receiver. It's his hands. It's his ability to catch the ball. I think that's the thing as I go through the transcripts of every wide receiver, that's spoken to the media. That's the thing they always talk to. It's his hands. And also I think it was Jalil Farouk who said, you can't even tell he was ever a defensive back. He looks like a natural wide receiver. So again, I think it's really early. But DJ Graham, I mean, I think if you have any questions about can DJ Graham play wide receiver in college, the answer is yes. Not only because of his past history as a wide receiver in college, not only just because of his athleticism. Obviously, everybody knows the interception he had against Nebraska in 2021, but it's also it's his passion. That's where he wants to play. He literally switched from defensive back to wide receiver last year in the middle of the season because his heart just wasn't in playing defensive back. And I also think he knows in some ways that he's kind of starting, not necessarily from the bottom, but he kind of has a tough hill to climb in terms of getting on the field. So I think he's taken this spring really seriously. I do think he has stood out. But again, I think it can be hard to say what every wide receiver is really best at. But I think DJ Graham, in terms of what can he do better than anybody else on the field, it's his hands, it's his catching ability, it's using his athleticism to catch passes at kind of weird angles. And so it's still early. We don't really know what exactly his role is going to be. But I said this earlier, Parker, when you and I talked, I think DJ Graham is going to have a role in this offense. I think the real question is, how big is that role?
I should unmute myself. Certainly. I think you're correct that DJ Graham is a guy that brings a lot to the table just in terms of sheer talent and his ability to play the wide receiver position. But I think opportunities are going to come at a premium amongst Oklahoma's receiver room this fall, especially were you to add Brennan Thompson to the mix, because I think that's a guy that pretty immediately inserts himself when it comes to carving out a role on the offensive side of the ball. So as we turn back to the chat here, T-Buck in the chat asks, you've probably explained this before, Parker, but what's the deal with the pitcher Gorilla's license plate? I'm from Wyandotte. Well, T-Buck, back when I was in undergrad, I was 20 years old at the time. I did a documentary on the town of Pitcher with several of my undergrad compatriots. And that would have been the fall of 2019. Yeah. So the Jalen Hurts year, but it's a ton of fun to do, ton of fun to produce. My favorite work of journalism that I've ever been a part of. You know what? I'll have our producer, Spencer, who was actually on the documentary crew with me. He helped produce it all. I'll make sure we drop a link to the documentary in the chat if you want to watch it. But yes, that is it. We picked this up from one of the former residents that we interviewed there. Just like, here, have this license plate. Like, okay, well, by all means. Ronnie Crimson loves the documentary. Can always count on Ronnie Crimson for some free press. Back to the chat here. Let's see what else we have. Who are the alphas on the team? Asks Jason. And honestly, a guy that we just touched on that I think fits that bill, Jesse, is Austin Stogner. Being a fifth-year senior, being a guy that came back for one last run at the University of Oklahoma, loves the school, loves the program, loves the logo on his chest, loves football, and is thankful for a second chance and especially a chance to be the guy at a position where he never really has been the guy before. That is a guy that has seized his leadership role immediately. But who else would you throw into that same category, Jesse?
Yeah, actually, before I answer that real quick, I got to mention, this is funny, and Parker, I never actually told you this. So I drove to Pitcher a few years ago. I had never been there. This was 2019, so this is pre-COVID. I had never been there. I was driving by there, drove through Pitcher, and then I started doing more research on Pitcher, and I actually stumbled, or like this was a couple years later, but I stumbled upon your documentary, and that was actually my first real introduction to you was through that documentary. I never told you that before, but the documentary is really great. Everybody should check it out.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Jesse knew me before he even knew me.
But no, anyways, I think Austin Stogner, you mentioned it earlier. I think Austin Stogner's return has been so valuable, not only because of the experience he brings, but because of the injuries in that room. I think his leadership has really been significant because of the injuries that are in that room to some of the younger guys. But yeah, I mean, it seems obvious to say, but I think Dillon Gabriel has really established as a leader. I mean, he said in his first spring availability, this is his team. He didn't really talk like that last year. And I think there's a few different factors at play with where his mindset is coming into this spring. But, he made that pretty clear. He sees this as his team. And I'm sure there's a lot of discussions that can go along with that. But I think he's seeing that role. I think Drake Stoops is playing a really big role this year. Obviously, as a sixth-year senior, a guy that has played all of his football at OU, who has spent time on the field. And then defensively, I think Danny Stutzman is a guy that almost everybody has pointed to as an alpha. Brent Venables said quite frankly, he was the most productive player on the defense last season. I think when we talked to Danny Stutzman a couple of weeks ago, he has seen this as kind of an opportunity for him to really step into a leadership role, particularly with Deshaun White, David Webu leaving. And also I think Rondo Bothroyd was another guy on the defensive line with his experience. He's a veteran through and through. He's been on the field a lot. And I think it sometimes can be hard to be an alpha when you've only been in the program for a few weeks. It's just spring ball. But I think Rondell Bothroyd is going to make a big impact on the defensive line, not only just with his play on the field, but with his ability to lead some of the other young guys in that rate. Parker, I think you're on mute.
Gosh dang it. I do that one time every single live stream. Okay, there. I'm on now. Okie Trades wants to know, have you all seen anything worth note from Jacob Switzer? Not hearing anything there. For those that don't understand, he's a transfer I haven't gotten up to speed on the Jacob Switzer news. Barry Switzer's grandson, transfer from Southeastern Louisiana. And look, if you watch him alongside the other four quarterbacks on the Oklahoma roster, you watch him in practice, I don't think this is going to hurt anyone's feelings because it's just the reality. He's on the roster because he's Barry Switzer's grandson. He's not a guy that's ever going to play a meaningful snap at Oklahoma. He's very clearly not on the same level as Dillon Gabriel, Jackson Arnold, General Booty, or even Davis Bevel, right? And I know everybody watching this video, I guarantee we're about to get slammed with Davis Bevel hate comments. But Jacob Switzer he's on the roster because he's Barry Switzer's grandson. He's wearing number 20. So not a guy that's going to play meaningful action probably ever at Oklahoma. And if he does, then that means you got issues. That means there's a lot of attrition at the quarterback position. Now, Tom Hill dropped $10 in the super chat and wants to know, does Makari Vickers take over or overtake a cornerback during the season? And it's kind of a broad question. I would assume he means, does Makari Vickers become a starter at a certain point in the season? And I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Jesse, but I would lean towards the answer being no, just because Woody Washington, barring injury, is dialed in as one of your two starters at corner. And then opposite him, I think you have a really intriguing battle between Gentry Williams, Kendall Dolby, and Josiah Wagner, who has inserted himself in a big way into that conversation for the other cornerback spot.
No, I agree with you. And I know, hey, Makari Vickers is someone you have talked about through and through. I know how high you are on him. But I also think you're right at the same time. Obviously, the kid's got talent. Obviously, he stands out on the field. But yeah, you mentioned it. And we've talked about it at the OU Insider VIPs. And listeners are probably tired of hearing me say this at this point. But this coaching staff values experience. At the same time, I do think they are going to be a little bit more open this year to playing some of these younger guys, but it's clear this coaching staff values experience. They value guys who have seen the field at the collegiate level. And I think it has less to do with his talent or with his ability to get on the field right away. But I think it's because you outlined right there that there are a couple of older guys that are in the program who have just as much, if not more, of a shot to be there. So I think Makari Vickers is a guy that, look, no, again, I said this in the opening when you asked me about takeaways. I think there's a lot of guys vying for a lot of spots. You can't take anything for granted. But again, I think when you're trying to project this far out about who's going to start, I think you kind of have to lean on the side of experience because this coaching staff does. And you mentioned a couple of guys there that I think are probably ahead of him. But again, it's early. These guys are freshmen. They have a long ways to go. And OU has the team has veterans or guys who have a little bit more experience and older in front of guys like Makari Vickers who can kind of show them the ropes. The time is going to come for guys like Makari Vickers, even if it's not this year.
Yeah. To answer another question from Ronnie Crimson in the chat, Isaiah McMorris, the 3-star wide receiver out of Bellevue, Nebraska, as far as his recruitment is concerned, he's getting ready. I believe he leaves tomorrow for his visit to Penn State. And I would expect that a decision is going to come pretty soon thereafter. It's an OU USC battle. Maybe Penn State makes a statement this week and they can get back in the mix, but that has really morphed into an OU USC battle over the last couple of weeks. USC made a really strong impression last week after he very nearly committed to Oklahoma, went on the visit 2 weeks ago at the end of March. So one to watch, certainly, because as I have mentioned to the OU Insider VIP board, for a multiplicity of reasons, all of which are good, McMorris has a very small window here to commit to Oklahoma if that's indeed what he wants to do. So if he commits to Oklahoma, great. If USC gets the nod from McMorris, I think many will look at that situation and say, you know what, that's all right, because with the other targets that Oklahoma is pursuing, there's not going to be a tremendous drop off between what you would get in Isaiah McMorris and who you are going to get in whoever the third wide receiver in this class for Oklahoma is. And I will add that in case it's news to anybody, Bryant Wesco and Zion Carney are the two guys that I would say are the most likely bets to end up in Oklahoma's class at the wide receiver position. Ronnie Crimson also asked, does Parker have any interesting mule shoe stories? Oh, I've got a few, but this is neither the time nor the place. We'll have to have an OU Insider After Dark edition where we go into all of that. Jeffrey Morton, we'll get to a couple more and then we'll call it a wrap here, Jesse. But 2 questions from Jeffrey Morton. Kobe and Kanik, thoughts on those two? And thoughts on Walker and Major. I'll hit the running backs. I'll let you hit the linebackers. Tawi Walker and Marcus Major, 2 guys that are talented football players, but are in a situation, I think, where if they play a lot, if they play regular snaps even in 2023, it's because you had injury issues ahead of them.
No, I completely agree with you there. And then, yeah, as far as Kanik and McKenzie, nobody's higher on Jaren Kanik than I am. And you saw it on the field last year. I mean, that guy, again, there were some freshman mistakes on the field, but Jaren Kanik's ready to start for this defense right away. And Parker and I have talked about it. I think both of us are on the same page. We're both on the same page. But Jaren Kanik is going to have a huge role in this defense next year. Not only just with what we saw on the field last year, but just coming into this year, I think he's a guy that I would be. Okay, stunned is maybe too strong of a word. I would be incredibly surprised if he is not the starting linebacker for the season opener. And as far as Kobe McKenzie, I actually think the thing that stood out to me the most about Kobe McKenzie is how much Brent Venables specifically has focused in on him on linebacker drills. And I think the number one thing, if you've ever played any competitive sports of any kind, is when the coach is riding you, it's because they see potential in you. And so I think Cole McKenzie, I think, is a little bit more cloudy than someone like Jaren Kanak, who I fully expect to take a starting linebacker spot. But I think Kobe McKenzie is clearly very talented. I do think he's going to have a role in 2023, and I think Brent Venables in particular has been, I don't even know if been hard on him is the right word, but has really focused in on him during individual drills. And I think it's because it's very clear that Kobe McKenzie is a talented guy who has a lot of potential on the field.
Somebody in the chat, I think it was Mr. D, wanted to know what shampoo I use. Dr. Squatch, Mr. D. I am Dr. Squatch everything. Shampoo, conditioner, body wash, lotion, everything Dr. Squatch. It's the best. That is my gosh, they really need to start paying me to say this stuff.
They do.
With how many people watch this on a weekly basis. I need to start charging for ad placement. But speaking of ad placement, ouinsider.com. If you're not already a VIP, head there for a ton more insight. And look, we have talked about a lot over the last hour. Hopefully it has been informative. Hopefully it has been entertaining for you guys. But as much information as you've gotten over the last hour and as much information as you regularly get, if you subscribe to this channel, which, by the way, we hit 9,000 subscribers. Let's get to 10 by the spring game. 10,000 subscribers. That's the goal. Hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing. If you are not an ouinsider.com VIP member, would highly recommend that you head over there, especially if you're a recruiting junkie, because Brandon and I have recruiting updates every single day for you all, constantly interacting on the message boards as well. It's the best online experience you can get as an OU fan, and you can sign up right now for just a couple bucks a month over at ouinsider.com. Tons of updates every week from myself, from Brandon, from Jesse, stories, articles, features, recruiting notes, portal buzz, and there's been some of that as we touched on earlier in the show. So ouinsider.com is the place to be if you are not already a member there. Jesse, thank you so much for jumping in. Awesome to get the opportunity to do this alongside you on a Wednesday night. And shout out, as always, to our producer, the man behind the scenes, and the DP for the Pitcher documentary that we did back in the day. That would be Spencer Forsyth. He's the man. He does it all. So very thankful to have him on board. Very thankful to have all of you on board every single Wednesday night when we do this here on the OU Insider YouTube channel. Come on back with us next week. Brandon will be back in his usual chair. We will see you then. Have a blessed night, everybody.